America did not just watch classic television, it trusted it. Networks sold calm fathers, wise grandfathers, clean morals, and living rooms where every problem could be solved before the credits rolled. But the men inside those roles were often carrying something the image machine could not allow. Closeted relationships, depression, alcoholism, blacklisting, rumors that never became proof but never fully disappeared. This was the deal. America got the father. Hollywood controlled the man for years. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now tonight. Robert Reed. To millions, he was Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, the architect father who could calm chaos with a patient voice and a steady smile. He looked like the blueprint for televised fatherhood. Safe, balanced, dependable. But off-camera, the story was far less tidy. Reed had classical training, studied seriously, broke through on The Defenders before Brady fame, and earned later Emmy nominations for Rich Man, Poor Man, and Roots. He also had a reputation for perfectionism that often clashed with the cheerful simplicity of the Brady Bunch. Cast accounts have long described him as deeply committed, sometimes exacting, and frequently frustrated by writing he thought was too flimsy. That alone would have made him a complicated sitcom dad. Then there was the private life he guarded. Reed was gay, and in the television culture of the late 1960s and early 1970s, that truth could threaten the very image that made him marketable. The irony was brutal. America embraced him as a model husband and father, while the real man had to divide himself to survive. That pressure seems to have followed him everywhere. Even people who cared about him later suggested the secrecy intensified his anger and sadness. So the perfect father image started to crack. Not in public, inside. America saw Mike Brady. Hollywood needed the mask. Robert Reed carried the strain of wearing it. Raymond Burr. Before many viewers thought of him as a father figure, they trusted him as Perry Mason and later as Ironside, a man whose voice sounded like authority itself. Burr projected certainty. He felt solid, protective, almost judicial, the kind of television presence that made audiences believe the truth would always win in the final act. But Burr also built one of old Hollywood's most controlled public myths. Biographers and later reporting have pointed to a tragic personal history he repeated in interviews, including stories about wives and a dead son, that researchers later challenged or could not verify. The public version made him legible to a suspicious era. It also made him safe. Off-camera, Burr shared decades with Robert Benavides, who became his longtime partner in life and business after they met through Perry Mason. Together, they built an orchid operation and later a vineyard. Yet for years, that relationship sat outside the official narrative, as if companionship on that scale could be edited into a footnote. And even after Burr died, the erasure lingered. Some coverage still misnamed Benavides or softened the relationship into something less than it was. That is the cruelty here. America saw certainty. Hollywood preferred a manageable legend, but Raymond Burr's real life was bigger, longer, and more intimate than the approved story allowed. Sebastian Cabot. As Mr. French on Family Affair, Cabot brought elegance to domestic television. He wasn't the father in the house, but he helped define the atmosphere around one. Gentle authority, manners, protection, a kind of polished emotional safety. And maybe that is why his private life remains so hard to pin down. Cabot was famously charming and highly controlled in public. He had a rich voice, a dignified bearing, and a gift for revealing almost nothing he did not want revealed. Later accounts, fan speculation, and old whispers have circled him for years, especially around questions of intimacy and privacy. But the story is less certain here, and responsible telling has to leave room for that uncertainty. What does seem clear is that silence itself could function as camouflage in classic television. You did not need a scandal to feel pressure. Sometimes you just needed a role that depended on reassuring America. Cabot understood presentation, he understood boundaries, and he knew how to redirect attention with grace. So his chapter is not about a solved secret. It is about the protective power of mystery. America saw Mr. French as composed and trustworthy. Hollywood rewarded restraint. And Sebastian Cabot left behind a life partly defined by what he never had to say. Paul Lynde. The audience laughed. That was the easy part. By the late 1960s and 1970s, Lynde had become one of television's most recognizable comic presences, especially on Hollywood squares, where the sarcasm landed fast and the delivery did half the work. He was sharp, theatrical, unmistakable. Viewers got the joke instantly. Long before that, Broadway and Bye Bye Birdie had already shown how expertly he could weaponize tone. But the industry's bargain with Paul Lynde was vicious. His mannerisms, timing, and camp energy were marketable as long as they remained coded, deniable, and safely unserious. Television could use the style. It was far less willing to accept the man. For a performer working in that era, being openly gay was still widely treated as a career risk, especially if mainstream family entertainment depended on pretending not to notice what everyone was already reading between the lines. The result was not freedom. It was exposure without honesty. Accounts of Lynde's later years repeatedly point to loneliness, drinking, and personal instability. The laughter stayed public. The pain became private, and that split may be why his story still hurts, because he was not simply hiding. He was being packaged. America saw a hilarious troublemaker. Hollywood monetized the signal, then denied the truth behind it. And Paul Lynde was left carrying the silence after the punchline. Hugh Beaumont. On Leave It to Beaver, Ward Cleaver became one of television's cleanest symbols of paternal calm. He was fair, measured, gentle without seeming weak. If classic TV wanted a national model for responsible fatherhood, Beaumont helped build it. Then the trail gets quieter. Unlike some of the other men on this list, Beaumont's hidden story is not best told through bold claims. It is told through distance, biography gaps, and the way later years pulled him away from the center of public attention. He had a background in theology, served as a medic during World War II after registering as a conscientious objector, and eventually stepped back from Hollywood, later farming Christmas trees in Minnesota. After a stroke, he retired from acting. That already complicates the image. Ward Cleaver looked fixed in place, as if he belonged forever in one spotless living room. Beaumont did not. After the show, his life became more private, more scattered, and in some areas less documented than viewers might expect from so famous a television father. Some researchers and fans have pointed to unresolved questions around that private space, but the evidence remains circumstantial. So what lingers is not proof. It is absence. America saw certainty. Time left shadows instead. And Hugh Beaumont's legacy still carries the quiet unease of a man viewers thought they fully knew. Robert Young. On Father Knows Best, he was Jim Anderson, the calm center of the American household. Later, on Marcus Welby, M.D., he played another figure of reassurance. Across decades, Young's gift was credibility. He sounded like a man with answers. He looked like stability, made human. But his private life told a harsher story. Young later spoke openly about alcoholism, and reporting across his later years described long struggles with depression as well. He was hospitalized for dependency, and in old age, his emotional crisis became impossible to keep entirely behind the image. The contrast was almost cruel. The man who symbolized emotional authority had spent years wrestling with despair. That matters because television was selling more than one actor. It was selling certainty itself. A father like Jim Anderson did not just entertain people, he reassured them that adulthood was solid, marriage was manageable, and wise men remained steady under pressure. That mythology made young valuable. It also made vulnerability look dangerous. By the time he publicly discussed recovery, the distance between role and reality was impossible to miss. So the suffering had to stay off to the side for as long as possible. Professional, contained, manageable, until it wasn't. America saw Father Knows Best, but the man inside the suit was fighting battles the script could not solve. And Robert Young's legacy is more moving when you see how hard he worked to keep standing inside that illusion. Will Geer. By the time he became Grandpa Walton, Geer radiated warmth that felt almost ancestral. He was the voice of rooted American wisdom, the old man on the porch who could make hardship feel survivable. For many viewers, he did not just play family values, he embodied them. But Geer's real life was never built for television neatness. He was a political activist, close to labor causes, connected to left-wing organizing, and blacklisted during the McCarthy era after refusing to cooperate with congressional pressure in the way Hollywood demanded. Work narrowed. Punishment followed. He rebuilt where he could, including through the theater community that grew around his Topanga property, later known as Theatricum Botanicum. And his life was unconventional in other ways, too. Accounts of his relationships and his ties to early gay rights history, especially through Harry Hay, point to a world far more radical and expansive than Grandpa Walton's fireside image suggested. This is not a story of shame. It is a story of refusal. Geer did not fit the narrow template the culture wanted. He survived it anyway. That changes the emotional frame completely. America saw a kindly old patriarch. The industry saw a political problem. But Will Geer's legacy may be strongest where it becomes an act of resistance, proving that the man behind the grandfather was larger than the role meant to contain him. William Frawley. To television audiences, especially through Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy, Frawley represented a gruff kind of familiarity. He was not soft, he was not polished, but he felt dependable in his own cranky way, like the older relative who complained through dinner and still showed up the next morning. Off camera, the mood could turn much darker. Frawley's drinking was no industry secret. In fact, when I Love Lucy was being cast, his alcoholism was serious enough to worry both the network and the people risking their careers on the show. He got the role anyway, and the performance became iconic. But success did not magically repair the rest of the man. Accounts of his later years often describe bitterness, failing health, and isolation. Around him, whispers circulated too, including rumors about his private life that never reached firm proof. That part of the story has to stay in careful language. The evidence remains uncertain. What is certain is the loneliness. The lovable television grouch aged into a far sadder image than viewers probably imagined. By the end, the laughter of old reruns and the silence of real life were no longer even pretending to belong to the same person. America saw the comic curmudgeon. Hollywood tolerated the damage as long as the scenes worked. And William Frawley's final shadow was not scandal so much as solitude. Dick Sargent. When he stepped into Bewitched as the second Darren Stevens, Sargent inherited one of television's safest jobs: wholesome husband, suburban magic, family-friendly charm. Even the conflict on that show was comforting. A twitch of the nose, a marital misunderstanding, then order restored. But for Sargent, order came at a price. Like many actors of his generation, he worked for years inside a culture where being openly gay could damage casting, sponsorship, and public standing. So he stayed quiet. The silence lasted decades. That is what makes his later honesty so powerful. In 1991, on National Coming Out Day, Sargent publicly came out and explained that concern for vulnerable young gay people was part of what pushed him to do it. He even called himself a retroactive role model. That phrase says everything. It carries humor, regret, and courage all at once. The man who had spent so long protecting his place in the fantasy finally chose visibility over fear. Soon after, he became more publicly connected to advocacy work, and in 1992, he and Elizabeth Montgomery served as Grand Marshals of the Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade. So this list ends with something rare, not erasure, recovery. America saw a sitcom husband. Hollywood trained him to disappear. But Dick Sargent's legacy now includes the late, difficult bravery of finally being seen. They helped teach America what a father looked like: calm, moral, dependable. But behind that glow were men navigating fear, secrecy, pressure, and loss. Which of these stories changes the way you see classic TV fathers the most? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories.